Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Washington, D.C., everyone, and welcome to the NATO Public Forum, the public event taking place during the NATO Summit. I'm Shannon Vavra, a national security reporter and a CNAS Next Gen National Security Fellow.
And I'm Michał Baranowski, Managing Director of GMF East and the Director of our Warsaw office, coming to you from the Eastern Flank. Wonderful to see you all. Many familiar faces, many friends and colleagues.
Exactly. Before we start, we would like to have your attention for a moment. We will have several interactive sessions where you'll be able to address your questions. For those in the audience, there are microphones located on either side of the room. And if you have a question, please proceed to the back of the room where our audience team will be able to guide you.
And besides people in this room, there is many of our fellow citizens watching online. And for those watching online, you can register at the NATO's Public Forum website to ask questions, to interact with the forum throughout the day.
And you are encouraged to communicate about the event on social media, follow up on the discussion, and amplify the conversation online by using the hashtag NATO Summit. Also, I want to mention that we have a couple of content creators who are conducting interviews in the YouTube studio backstage, Sam Ellis, Victoria Reichert, and Marvin Newman.
Wonderful. And this is, of course, a team effort. Working together with NATO Public Diplomacy Division, and the US government was a team of co-organizers, which I want to recognize today and right now. The Atlantic Council, CNAS, GlobSec, the Hudson Institute, and my home organization, the German Marshall Fund of the United States.
I would also like to acknowledge our corporate partners. We are truly grateful for their support. I'd like to thank our lead sponsors, Google, who is also supporting the YouTube studio on-site, AWS, Microsoft, and Northrop Grumman, and our generous partners, Boeing, Dataminr, Leidos, Lockheed Martin, MBDA, Oracle, and Saab.
So as you can see, it takes a village to organize such an amazing forum. And I want to recognize also our institutional partners, those behind me, who reached out throughout the alliance to make this forum happen and to let everyone know that this is a great program. So please also reach out to our institutional partners.
And with that, to officially open the event, it is my great pleasure to invite on stage Marie Doha Besancenot, Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO, and Amanda Mansour, Special Assistant to the US President and Senior Director for Partnerships and Global Engagement.
Good morning. Welcome to the NATO Public Forum 2024. On behalf of our Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, and all our colleagues at the NATO headquarters, I'm very happy to welcome you to this very special anniversary forum. In Washington for the first time since 1999, that was 25 years ago. After Vilnius last year, it is a great privilege to organize this event here in the United States with a very special host nation.
And on behalf of President and Dr. Biden, the entire US government team, and our consortium partners, who I'm going to say them again just because they've been absolutely invaluable, the Atlantic Council, German Marshall Fund, GlobSec, Hudson Institute, and Center for New American Security, we are thrilled to kick off this historic event. This year's public forum is larger and more diverse than ever before, featuring voices from across NATO, from across the United States, voices of civil society, military, youth, industry, and government, those on the front lines of today's threats and on the threats of the future.
We have also partnered with institutions across the alliance to enable colleagues in all 32 allied nations and many partner nations, not only to follow the event, but also to engage with us live. So to all those attending the watch parties here in DC, back in Belgium, in other locations across the Atlantic, welcome to you too. And finally, a big welcome to the 4,000 followers who are already with us online. This event is indeed being live streamed.
The United States is grateful for the opportunity to host the NATO Summit here in Washington, D.C. for a few reasons. First, it's NATO's 75th birthday, so happy Diamond Jubilee. And congratulations to the 1 billion NATO citizens for this incredible milestone, for the investment, leadership, and sacrifice that brought us here, and for the many accomplishments still ahead. Second, as you NATO nerds might already know, 75 years ago, the Washington Treaty was signed right here by the original 12 allies in Washington, D.C. And I'll note that last night, Secretary General Stoltenberg described the Washington Treaty by saying, "Never have so few words meant so much to so many." Last, but certainly not least, we are grateful to be this year's hosts because of the foundational role that alliances and partnerships play in U.S. foreign policy. And there is no better example than NATO, the standard bearer for the world. Strengthening and modernizing our alliances has been one of the central projects of President Biden's foreign policy since he took office. So you can imagine how happy we are to spend a whole week with single-minded focus on just that.
The Public Forum is definitely NATO's premier public event to connect friends and citizens across the globe to our alliance. So what to expect? What makes this edition exceptional? It will feature over 40 panels and conversations. That's a lot of quality time with leaders and experts just over 2 days. We are proud to host 10 allied partners, heads of state and governments. We are also very happy to host 21 ministers, 13 foreign affairs ministers, 11 from allied nations, 2 from partner nations, 8 allied ministers of defense, and we are especially honored to welcome senior Ukrainian voices like Minister Yermak and Stefanishina. We're also very grateful to the American senators and House representatives who agreed to join us, as well as 10 US government senior officials. We will also be joined by 13 senior NATO officials, including our 3 highest military leaders, general managers of our agency, NCIA and SPA, as well as our chief scientist. Because we want this forum to be inclusive and to be open to other geographies, we have prepared for you Vox Pop videos from the US heartland and from NATO's frontiers in the Arctic, in the East, in the South. We've also invited the youth to join, drawing from our very recent Youth Summit in Stockholm and Miami. So you will also hear their voices. And finally, you will also hear 8 corporate voices because the industry matters and because we have great corporate partners.
As you know, the Public Forum is running concurrently with and right next door to the actual summit. Today, the North Atlantic Council, or the NAC, will meet to discuss NATO's deterrence and defense, as well as how we will continue to support Ukraine. Tomorrow, the NAC will be joined first by the EU and its Indo-Pacific partners in the morning, then by Ukraine in the afternoon.
As you see, we have designed this event to be in close dialogue with the mostly closed-door event next door, mirroring it, tackling the very same questions that are being discussed and negotiated there, and we have added a forward look on NATO's key trajectories for years to come. So let me say again, welcome and bienvenue à tous to the NATO Public Forum.
And now it's time to kick off our first panel entitled NATO Looking Ahead, Defending Our Future. It is my honor to welcome to the stage U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and GMF President Heather Conley.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda and Marie Doha. Warmest of welcomes to you, Secretary Blinken. And good morning, NATO Public Forum. You and I have an awesome responsibility here. You and I are sort of like the pace car for this 2-day race of the Public Forum.
I'm counting on you, Heather.
Well, I'm counting on you, so I guess we have to say, let's start our NATO engines and let's get going. And we have a lot of news to talk about, a lot of the most pressing issues on the agenda. But I just want to take a moment. I want to take a moment and honor this historic moment. So I looked back at those transcripts from 1949, and I discovered what the 51st Secretary of State said at the signing, Secretary Dean Acheson. He said, "For those who participated in the drafting of this treaty, the Washington Treaty, must leave to others the judgment of the significance and the value of that act." So I just want to ask you very personally, no talking points, from one Europeanist to another Europeanist, what does this moment mean to you very personally?
Well, first, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I don't think we've seen this kind of assemblage of, we heard
the term, use it.
NATO nerds. You're all here.
We celebrate this. We celebrate it.
And I proudly count myself among you, and have for more than 30 years now.
Yes, sir.
The moment means a lot of things. The moment means 75 years. Jens Stoltenberg said it yesterday. This is now the longest enduring alliance in history. That in and of itself is remarkable. But I think it's evidence that country after country, government after government, representing now 1 billion people, has seen the extraordinary value of this alliance. And I think it really boils down to this when you think about it, because when Dean Acheson was here, when our predecessors were here, they were coming off 2 world wars. And the absolute priority for them was trying to put in place the understandings, the arrangements, the structures to prevent another global conflagration. And NATO was at the heart of that. And what is at the heart of NATO? This extraordinary commitment that an attack on one is an attack on all is the strongest possible deterrent to conflict, the best possible way to avoid war, because any would-be aggressor contemplating an attack knows that if they take on one of us, they have to take on all of us. And what we've seen over 75 years is a defensive alliance that's kept the peace for the citizens that it represents. And that in turn enables something else, because ultimately, NATO is not an end in itself. The end in itself is to make sure that citizens of the countries that come together in NATO are able to lead their lives freely, securely, to try to make progress, to try to hand down a better life to their children than the one they had. And it starts with the security. If you have that, everything else becomes possible.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, one of the pressing priorities at this 75th year is, of course, Ukraine. Last evening, we heard President Biden make some announcements about a new air defense package for Ukraine. So, Mr. Secretary, I actually want to start with that news. I hope you can help us unpack that and tell us a little bit more about the Ukraine package that we can expect at the summit.
Well, you heard the President yesterday talk about the work that we've done and other allies have done to put together more air defense systems for Ukraine, notably Patriots, but also many other systems, because we know that's the key to so many things. It's a key to defending Ukraine's infrastructure. It's a key to defending its people. It's a key to defending its forces. It's also key to making sure that we're unlocking the private sector and economic investment in Ukraine that will also be essential to Ukraine's success going forward. But people need to make investments in secure environments. So these air defense systems, we know, have been job number 1 for Ukraine and, as a result, for the alliance that's supporting it. But this is just part of a comprehensive package that we're putting in place, that we've actually put in place since before day 1, to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to defend itself when it needs it. And I'm also pleased to announce that as we speak, the transfer of F-16 jets is underway, coming from Denmark, coming from the Netherlands. And those jets will be flying in the skies of Ukraine this summer to make sure that Ukraine can continue to effectively defend itself against the Russian aggression.
So we also understand, coming out of the summit, we'll have announcements that there will be a new NATO command in Wiesbaden that will be very focused, building on the extraordinary work of the Ramstein Defense Contact Group to sustain capabilities for Ukraine, operations, maintenance. We'll have a NATO liaison officer.
That's right.
In Kyiv. I mean, this is a pretty robust package that you're talking about. You said something when you last were in Kyiv on, I believe, May 14th. And you said, our strategy is that Ukraine must win. Is that package, and this is robust, but are the packages that NATO is putting forward, is it enough to fulfill that vision for Ukraine to win?
Yeah, I believe it is. And let's talk about 2 things. Let's talk about what winning means, what success is for Ukraine. And in my estimation, at least, success is a strong, independent Ukraine, increasingly integrated with Euro-Atlantic institutions like the European Union, like NATO, and that is able to stand on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. And what we see is Ukraine on a trajectory to do just that, militarily. We have an incredibly robust package that will be unveiled over the next couple of days at NATO that builds a very clear, strong, robust, well-lit bridge to NATO membership for Ukraine, including, as you mentioned, the first time NATO's dedicated a command to helping an aspiring country join the alliance. This, in and of itself, is extraordinary. Just a few weeks ago, President Biden signed our bilateral security agreement with Ukraine. At the last NATO summit, on its margins, President Biden brought together more than 30 countries to negotiate and now sign these bilateral security agreements. What does that mean? It means that for the next decade, country after country has vowed to help Ukraine build its deterrent and defense capacity. That sends the strongest possible message to Vladimir Putin that he can't outlast Ukraine, he can't outlast Ukraine's partners. So the military trajectory is clear. The economic trajectory is critical. Making sure that private sector investment is being driven into Ukraine. Our former Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, has been leading our efforts with so many other allies and partners. We just had a very strong reconstruction conference in Germany. But all of this is about making sure that investment is driven to Ukraine. I'm convinced that Ukraine has tremendous capacity, first, to develop a strong defense industrial base for itself and for other countries, but also because of the extraordinary innovation of Ukrainian entrepreneurs, the Ukrainian economy, to develop a strong, robust economy. Of course, the air defenses are critical to make sure, as I said before, that investments that are being made, physical investments that are being made, are protected. And then finally, democratic deepening. The fact that the EU opened its accession process with Ukraine, the fact that NATO also requires, as Ukraine moves irreversibly along the path to membership, that it continue reforms, that's the strongest guarantee that the reforms that the Ukrainian people so strongly support will continue and will deepen. And that results in a Ukraine that is strong, that is independent, and that is the best possible rebuke to Vladimir Putin.
Mr. Secretary, I'm so glad you talked about the well-lit bridge, because I think an enormous amount of energy is being expended upon verbal gymnastics in some ways, the irreversible path, the well-lit bridge, all of these terms. But what you've been talking about, the actions, the robustness, that speaks louder than words.
That's exactly right.
That's the relationship with NATO. But why are we so caught up? Why can't there be greater simplicity and clarity about this incredibly close relationship that Ukraine will join NATO? Help me understand why we're using all of these very creative words.
Well, we have a lot of very talented people who have to spend a lot of time writing NATO declarations. We want to make sure they're fully employed.
So that's the secret.
So, as someone who's done that myself in the past, in all seriousness, by the way,
please.
Our colleagues are doing extraordinary work because, look, we have 32 allies. This is a democratic alliance, an alliance of democratic countries. Different countries have slightly different views on some of these issues, and part of our responsibility is to proceed with consensus. The greatest strength that we have, the most valuable currency we have as an alliance, is our unity, but that unity doesn't just happen. It's the product of conversation, it's the product of listening, it's the product of talking, it's the product of building that consensus, and it gets reflected in these documents. But Heather, you're exactly right. I think it's important to look at the words, but it's even more important to look at the actions. As I said a moment ago, the first time NATO's had a dedicated command to helping an aspiring country join the alliance. And that has very practical components to it that will, I think, speed Ukraine's accession to the alliance. And we talk about a bridge. It's nice to have an image, a metaphor. As my colleague Jim O'Brien likes to say, it's a bridge that's going to be strong, well-lit, and with this command, I think it'll be a short bridge, too.
So I'm going to sprinkle another historical quote, and this was by President Truman the year following the signing of the Washington Treaty. At his inaugural address, he said, and I thought this is a good definition, not quite that word salad that we were talking about, the main objective of the North Atlantic Treaty is to erase any possible doubt and uncertainty that may be lurking in the minds of potential aggressors. Is that package enough to deter Vladimir Putin on Ukraine? That's the question. Does that provide sufficient certainty?
Well, first, President Truman had the remarkable gift of speaking clearly, speaking directly, and we'll try to live up to that example as best we can. But look, the proof will be in the pudding. I believe it should. But at the end of the day, what is so important is delivering these practical results, showing that Ukraine has the capacity, that its partners have the capacity. I mentioned a moment ago the fact that the F-16s are on their way. The transfer is happening as we speak. They'll be flying in the skies of Ukraine this summer. That's another very important proof point because, again, it concentrates Vladimir Putin's mind on the fact that he will not outlast Ukraine, he will not outlast us, and if he persists, the damage that will continue to be done to Russia and its interests will only deepen. The fastest way, the quickest way to get to peace is through a strong Ukraine.
Absolutely. To sort of twist President Truman's words a bit, I'm wondering if the aggressor is starting to put doubts in the mind of some NATO members. And what I'm speaking about is these brazen hybrid attacks. We've seen a series of them. In fact, quite extraordinarily, U.S. bases across Europe had to go on high alert this last week. This is starting to be of greater concern. What does NATO have to do to try to get to that problem? Because that is, undermining NATO unity.
It has to do, and it is doing, what it's always done, which is to adapt. When we came into office, one of the most important things to do from the outset, besides re-engaging the alliance, re-energizing it, and as necessary, reimagining it, was to put forward a new strategic concept, the first one in a decade, to take account for the fact that we're in a dramatically changed security environment with not only new actors posing challenges, but also new means, new methods. That strategic concept reflects the fact that we have these hybrid threats. Since we put out the strategic concept, we've been working to turn it into real plans, real programs that demonstrate that NATO is capable and effective in dealing with exactly these kind of challenges. That's going to be carried forward at this summit. More to be said about that in the next couple of days. But I can tell you from the meetings that we've had to prepare for this summit, every ally is acutely aware of this. Every ally is acutely focused on this. The fact that we've seen attacks in recent months, arson attacks, sabotage attacks, attempted assassinations, misinformation, disinformation, cyber threats. These are not one-offs. This is part of a deliberate strategy by Russia to try to undermine our security and undermine the cohesion of the alliance. It's not going to work because we see it and we're acting on it.
I think we need to start acting on it. It's so concerning that these are increasing for sure. Let me turn a little bit to the broader elements of the summit and working with our Indo-Pacific partners. The largest land war in Europe since the Second World War is not simply a concern to the Euro-Atlantic community. We now, this week, have Chinese military exercising with the Belarusian military. We have reports of North Korean trainers coming into Russia. This is now a global alignment of our adversaries from Russia to China, Iran, and North Korea. Can NATO play that bridge between the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic? This is the third summit where our 4 Indo-Pacific prime ministers are here. Their commitment is getting stronger. Can NATO play that role?
Yes, and we are seeing it play exactly that role. You mentioned this is the third summit in a row that we've had Indo-Pacific partners here at NATO. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea. And it's a reflection of the fact of exactly what you said, that these challenges are linked, that our theaters of work together are linked. And maybe this was crystallized by Ukraine when Prime Minister Kishida of Japan said that what's happening in Europe today could be happening in East Asia tomorrow. When Russia committed its aggression, its renewed aggression against Ukraine, and Japan stood up, South Korea stood up, Australia, New Zealand. This is a reflection of that recognition that these challenges are linked, and when democracies stand together, whether they're in Europe, Asia, or elsewhere, we're going to be stronger and more effective. So as we're gathering here in Washington with our Indo-Pacific partners, what this means is we are breaking down the silos between Europe, Asia, and the United States. And this has been a very deliberate objective of President Biden from day one. Not only building convergence with our allies, stronger convergence when it comes to how to approach Russia, and in a different way, how to approach China, but also breaking down the barriers, the walls between European partners and Asian partners. And of course, what's happened just in the last year and a half has only reinforced the imperative. Ukraine. We see, unfortunately, China not providing weapons to Russia to pursue its aggression, but being the major contributor to Russia's defense industrial base. 70% of the machine tools that Russia's importing are coming from China. 90% of the microelectronics that Russia's importing coming from China. That's enabled it to sustain its aggression against Ukraine. We've seen a massive buildup of its weaponry over the last year and a half. Tanks, missiles, munitions, That's the product of a defense industrial base being fueled by China. As a result, European allies understand the challenge posed by China to Europe's security. And of course, China can't have it both ways. It can't be all at once, or claim to be, for peace and want to have better relations with Europe, while at the same time fueling what is arguably the most significant threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. We see it in the relationship between Russia and North Korea. That's abundantly clear. And in all of these areas, as well as some of the hybrid threats that you alluded to before, the connections are clearer and clearer. The alliance is one place, and maybe I would argue a central place, where we can bring everyone together so that we're acting together.
So, Mr. Secretary, you're talking about strengthening this global alliance, of which the United States has built over the last 75 years. You have some very vocal American national security analysts saying there's one thing we have to focus on: China. Everything else is a waste. Let our allies deal with everything else. We have to focus on China. What is your answer to that criticism or critique of what you're trying to build here?
Well, my answer is, first of all, of course, we are focusing on China, and we're doing it in two ways. One, we're making the investments in ourselves at home to make sure that we're approaching China from a position of domestic strength. When you look at everything that's happened over the last 3.5 years with the incredible investments in our own infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our communications, through the Infrastructure Act, when you look at our commitment to make sure that we maintain our leadership, our world leadership on microelectronics and chips through the Chips and Science Act, when you look at the investments that have been made in climate technology, which is going to be a critical part of the 21st century economy, that puts the United States in a position of strength. European allies are doing exactly the same thing. But the other aspect of this is not only, as we've done, re-energize our alliances and partnerships, starting with Europe, but also make sure that there is greater and greater convergence in our approach to some of the challenges posed by China. I think if you look at what NATO has said in the strategic concept, if you look at what key Europeans have said, what the European Union has said, it is abundantly clear that we have more convergence now when it comes to how to approach China than we've ever had. And that's a source of tremendous strength. It means that instead of having one country having to deal with the challenges alone, the United States representing maybe 20% of world GDP, suddenly we've aligned 40, 50, and with our Asian partners, 60% of world GDP. That makes a huge difference. And so precisely because these challenges are joined, dealing with some of the problems posed by China requires this work with, alignment with, convergence with Europe as well as with Asia.
I believe I would say, maybe using a little bit of that Truman simplicity, the adversary has a vote and they are aligning. We have not the luxury of focusing on one.
That's correct. And this is, I think it's a really important point. This is not simply a reflection of our choices, it's a reflection of the choices, the policies that China has chosen to pursue, and of course that Russia is pursuing in Ukraine right now.
And I think you're right, it does pose for all NATO members a structural challenge of how do you work in those multiple theaters when you're dealing with their alignment versus how we are organizing our alliances. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to turn, because you raised it, and I'm really glad you did, talking about alliance unity. We know that is the center of gravity. We know how important that is, and we also know that sacrifices sometimes have to be made to keep that unity. You hear mutterings of the least common denominator. We're not getting exactly what we want because we have to ensure that alliance unity. But I think over the last week, we're crossing a threshold where accepting unity, we're sacrificing or jeopardizing NATO security. You had one NATO member who has now visited Moscow and Beijing. He's talked about Beijing as being a strategic partner, has received by NATO and the EU an opt-out of support for Ukraine. You had another member this week suggest that they would like to be welcomed into a security organization that is also it participated with Russia and China. NATO's message has to be clear, does it not?
Well, I think
this is getting to a point of straining unity.
NATO's message is very clear. It's very clear in what's happening here in Washington over these couple of days. It's very clear in the entire trajectory of the alliance over the last 3.5 years. An alliance that's now 32 members strong, with Finland and Sweden, of course, joining. An alliance that is better budgeted and resourced than it's ever been. When we started out, 9 members of the alliance were meeting the 2% of GDP for defense threshold that was set at the Wales Summit. We're now at 23 NATO allies. So NATO is speaking loudly and clearly with its actions. As I mentioned before, we have a strategic concept agreed among all the allies that very well reflects the challenges and threats that we face today and will be facing tomorrow. So I see NATO speaking not only with unity, but unity that's actually raising the floor on what NATO partners are contributing, raising the floor on an understanding of the threats that we face, raising the floor on our commitment to take action together to deal with those threats. So far from a race to the bottom just for the sake of consensus or unity, what I'm seeing is a race to the top by this alliance. Again, let's be very simple about it. NATO is stronger than it's ever been. It's bigger than it's ever been. It's more fit for purpose than it's ever been.
I think, Mr. Secretary, it's not about necessarily the 2%, and I think we're going to be raising that bar,
Yes.
don't you think? It's going to be the new 2.5, maybe even the new 3% if we're heading into this this era of tremendous instability. No, but I'm saying even a NATO member can spend 2%, but still be working to undermine the security of the alliance itself. So it's not just 2%. How do we get back to, again, that core of the Washington Treaty, the preamble? We defend democracy, we defend a certain set of values. When allies don't profess necessarily to uphold those values, what's the answer? I mean, this is about us. It's not about the adversary. It's about who we are.
Of course, allies, as we speak, for the last 2.5 years now, have been defending those values, defending our democracy that's at stake in Ukraine. They know that it's not only about Ukraine, it's not only about the Ukrainian people, it's actually about the values that unite us and the basic principles that all of us have agreed on together with so many other countries around the world that were designed to try to keep the peace and protect against aggression. And NATO countries are standing up day after day to defend those principles, to defend those values. Now look, communicating with adversaries, with enemies, that's fine. Communications are important. You want to make sure that at least you're not misunderstanding each other. But of course, what's communicated is really important as well. I would hope that anyone, for example, going to Moscow now, makes very clear to Vladimir Putin that NATO's not going anywhere, Ukraine's not going anywhere, the European Union's not going anywhere, and that what we just saw the other day, a horrific attack on a children's hospital, is totally, totally, totally unacceptable, and Russia will continue to be ostracized as long as it engages in those kinds of actions. I would hope and expect that anyone going to Beijing makes clear what I said a moment ago, that continuing to fuel Russia's defense industrial base, continuing to allow the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War to go forward, is something that is unacceptable to Europe. And that means unacceptable is a word. Actions follow that, including, as necessary, sanctions, including, as necessary, not allowing relations that Beijing might seek to improve to actually improve. So what we're focused on is what allies and partners are doing, and I can tell you as an alliance, what we're doing is evidencing greater strength and commitment to the principles, the values that are at the heart of this alliance that I've seen.
Are you confident those messages are being sent?
I have confidence those messages are being sent.
Right.
But again, we come together as 32 countries. From the perspective of the United States, it's so important that we listen to each other, that we communicate clearly with each other, and yes, we develop consensus. But what I'm seeing again is a consensus that is moving us up, not holding us back.
So we've welcomed, this is Sweden's first
That's right.
NATO summit. Great to come in. We've got this bolt of energy, I feel it, with Sweden and Finland joining. There's an energy in the Nordic-Baltic quadrant of NATO. How has it been to welcome those new men? They're seeing what's behind the curtain. How have you introduced your two new colleagues now into NATO? Tell us some good stories.
Well, of course, Sweden and Finland have been NATO partners for a long time. They've contributed tremendously to the alliance, to our common endeavors for a long time. But to have them at the table is something I suspect most people in this room 3 years ago, I doubt anyone really would have imagined that.
If you would have read a lot of think tank reports 15 years ago, you would have known this would have been the case, but that's okay.
I might have
Well, let it slip.
I might have written one or two of those reports back in the day.
Good,
So,
see?
but in all seriousness, you're right. I think it has added a a jolt of energy. They're both remarkable partners. They bring so much to the alliance. They change the strategic equation in a very powerful way. But it's also a reflection of new realities that the entire alliance is facing. New aggression, new forms of aggression, a new determination to stand up together to combat it. But look, we have a little kept secret for the alliance is there's a pretty strong Nordic and Scandinavian component to this alliance, as evidenced by Jens Stoltenberg. President Biden gave him the Medal of Freedom last night. And that was a very powerful reflection of the extraordinary leadership that he's demonstrated over a decade of incredible change for NATO, but a decade that he's managed with brilliance.
Well, he's really had a unique talent of communicating with some of those allies that don't see eye to eye. Always with the consensus was incredibly important in resolving some of the difficulties in the run-up to welcoming Sweden and Finland. Any advice for his successor about how to manage the diplomacy of maintaining alliance unity?
Well, I know Mark Rutte. I think many in this room do as well. I have tremendous confidence in his abilities to take the torch from Jens and to do what Jens did so brilliantly, which was actually to listen to all of our partners, to build that consensus, to demonstrate through our actions that unity really is our most valuable currency, and to build it every single day. But again, it doesn't just happen. It's the product of being engaged every single day, not pulling back, not isolating ourselves, actually leaning in, leaning forward. I know Mark is going to do that brilliantly, and I think the trajectory we're on with all of our member states is to continue to do exactly that.
So, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to end. My last question is going to be a historical question, but moving forward. So, as Dean Acheson asked, it is for others to judge, and the 71st Secretary of State just rendered judgment on the 51st Secretary of State's judgment. So let's look forward when NATO celebrates its 150th anniversary, next 75 years.
Look forward to seeing you all there, by the way.
Yes, exactly. We'll be in our wheelchairs, exactly. What judgment would you like your successor to render about what you have done here on the 75th anniversary to keep 1 billion people safe? Will they know that we've done enough to advance the cause of freedom?
Oh. The proof will be in the tests that are in front of us and how we meet them. But I hope that when we look back on this period of time, one of the conclusions that people will reach is that the United States was leaning in. We re-engaged our alliance. We helped to re-energize our alliance. We helped to reimagine our alliance so that even as we celebrate 75 years of the most successful defensive alliance in history, we were resolutely focused on the future and doing everything that we could in our time to make sure that that success for 75 years would continue and that the alliance would be adapted, focused, fit for purpose for our time and for the years ahead. Because again, I come back to what I started with, Heather. This alliance is a reflection of a commitment that leaders in all of our countries make to the people we represent. A commitment that we do everything possible to keep them secure, to prevent wars, to deter conflict, so that they can move on with their lives in freedom, in security. And so if we manage, as the result of the actions that we've taken over these last years and in this period, to do that in the years ahead, we will have succeeded.
We will know we will do enough if Ukraine wins.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This has been a great kickoff. I hope we've started things off. We've revved up our engines. I know you've provided a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much. I know you have to get back to start your summit, but first, will everyone please join me in warm applause?
Thank you.
For Secretary of State.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. Thank you, Heather, for a great scene setter for our conversation throughout the day. Really answering the question, what is at stake for NATO, for close to 1 billion of our citizens. This was a news-making session. F-16s are coming this summer. The bridge for Ukraine will be not only well-lit, but also short. And as Secretary Blinken pointed out at the very end, it's all for us to lean in, both during this summit and in the next 75 years of NATO's history. So with this political scene setter, let me now turn to our military dimension, and let me welcome Peter Rao of Hudson Institute, who will lead a conversation with General Cavalli. Peter, the stage is yours.
Well, good morning. As mentioned, I'm Peter Rao, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Europe and Eurasia at Hudson Institute, and it is my high honor to be joined today by United States Army General Chris Cavalli. General Cavalli was commissioned into the infantry in 1987. He's had a long and distinguished career, culminating in his appointment to EUCOM, a position he took up on July 1st, 2022. And 3 days later, on our nation's birthday, July 4th,
That's right.
he became Supreme Allied Commander Europe. General Cavalli, welcome to the Public Forum.
Thank you, Peter.
At public conferences like these that focus on European security, we tend to talk a lot about deterrence, how to preserve the peace that the alliance has forged for us over the decades.
Yeah.
But there tends to be less focus on warfighting capability, the ability to actually win a war should deterrence fail. So to rectify that imbalance a little bit, let me ask you, how confident are you that the alliance could be able to conduct high-intensity combat 10, 20, 30 days into a war with Russia should deterrence fail?
No, I'm quite confident. So we have, over the last couple of years, based on the work of my predecessors, one of whom is sitting right over there. Hi, Scap, how are you, sir? We have been building out a strategic concept and then the enablement of that strategic concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. So it started with the strategic approach, and then it's come down through a couple of major documents. In the last couple of years, what we've done is turn those into concrete plans. Traditional, classical operational plans that describe how we're going to defend specific areas of the alliance and what we're going to use to do it and what the sequence of events is. This is a big shift. The alliance had gone for many years without plans since the end of the Cold War, real significant plans to defend the territory of the alliance. That has produced a whole range of changes for us. As you know, after the end of the Cold War, the alliance refocused on out-of-area operations and crisis management. These tended to be smaller scale operations done on a predictable basis, so it allowed for a cyclical force generation model. All of this gave us the opportunity to economize, especially in terms of higher headquarters and enabling organizations such as logistics brigades and long-range fires and things like that. All that's coming back now as a result of the plans. The plans have given us a force structure requirement that's guiding the way we resource the plans and the way NATO's militaries, the national militaries, compose themselves, what sort of forces they build for us. It is produced in a very short amount of time. Instead of a cyclically available brigade or two, we suddenly now have 300 forces at the higher two levels of readiness against the plans, 300,000, even more depending on how you count. That's because we've been able to amalgamate and incorporate national defense plans into the NATO defense plan so they complement each other. And it's produced an ability to be forward postured. As you know, we've got 8 battle groups on the ground, forward postured, that blend with national host nation forces in their Article 3 responsibilities. So it's a very effective method. We have the right number of troops forward right now. We've been practicing at large scale our ability to reinforce. As you know, those battle groups need to be reinforced when the time is needed up to the brigade level. We've been rehearsing that. We've done extensive readiness checks to make sure they have the right amount of ammunition and so forth. And as we go forward, we've continued to do these large-scale exercises where we practice the subsequent reinforcement of specific areas. Steadfast Defender this year, over 90,000 soldiers. So I'm very confident in our ability to do that. We have some weaknesses that we have to work on, and we will.
Those DDA family of plans were, of course, ratified at the last NATO summit in Vilnius. How far along are the allies in resourcing those plans?
Quite far along. So, you know, all of this reorientation from out-of-area operations onto large-scale collective defense of the territory of the alliance is a profound shift, right? It's a very, very big shift. National militaries have to go through that shift on their own. The U.S. military has been undergoing it for several years now. And for the alliance, it's a big shift. It's challenged a lot of the ways we did business during the last 35 years. One of those is the way we generate force and the way we source our operational plans. The way we did it was frankly designed to put together very small organizations on a very predictable basis. Now, we've had to turn the system around. Instead of what will you make available, the question is, if we got into a large-scale fight, what would you not make available? We assume you'll make most of your military available. My deputy, Admiral Keith Blount, is the one who came up with this reformulation of the question, and it immediately refocused our allies in the way they contribute. So several allies have contributed their entire military force structure, save just the tiniest amount, to NATO's plans. As a result of this, for the most part, in capital platforms, in large ground units, we're pretty much where we need to be. We have some gaps in specific places, especially at enablement and logistics, that sort of thing. And those we're working on through the NATO defense planning process right now.
My colleagues at Hudson Institute who track the war most closely have suggested that Russia has shown some adaptability on the battlefield and have learned some lessons along the way. Is NATO learning lessons from the war in Ukraine? And are you confident that our learning curve is ahead of the Russians?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to remember is that NATO consists of nations' militaries, right? So those nations are studying very intensely the war in Ukraine, and each of the nations our member nations are developing and evolving new techniques and working on new technologies. But we as an alliance also study it very closely. We have a couple of different organizations that study the war in Ukraine, and we're about to set one up with our Ukrainian colleagues in Poland. The JTEC is going to come together, and that will really be an information exchange center for lessons learned. Then we incorporate those into our future doctrine. My friend Philippe Lavigne, who I hope is here someplace, the Supreme Allied Commander for Transformation, writes future concepts that are largely informed by what we're seeing in Ukraine. And then, of course, inside the alliance, we use our exercise program to test new techniques and new technologies that, for the most part, nations bring forward into the exercise. But it is quickly evolving. Your colleagues at Hudson are right. The Russians are very cleverly adapting to technologically and procedurally to many of the challenges that they run into in Ukraine.
One thing that's less discussed are SACEUR's peacetime authorities.
Sure.
But that has evolved somewhat since
Tremendous.
the onset of full-scale hostilities in Ukraine. Are your authorities commensurate and sufficient to prepare the alliance in a period of high tension prior to the full onset of hostilities? And perhaps for the audience, you could just lay out what those authorities are.
Yeah. So SACEUR's authorities were pretty circumscribed during long periods of peace, which is fairly appropriate, right? At the beginning of this conflict, my predecessor, Todd Walters, petitioned the NAC to activate the 5 graduated response plans, which is a form of planning process that we had. When those were activated, General Walters suddenly got significant authorities to move folks around. For example, he got the authority to deploy parts or all of the very high readiness joint task force on his plan. He got the authority to perform specified enhanced vigilance activities throughout the AOR, so he could name an operation and then conduct it, defensive operations. As we came through the new family of plans, one part of the modernization of NATO's collective defense has been to change the way we grant authorities to SACEUR. And instead of going one by one through an incredibly arcane manual like this thick that gives one authority at a time, what we've done is we've bundled authorities together and we've attached those to certain alert states. And some amount of the alert state I'm allowed to declare, like up to alert state yellow, and just inform the NAC, and that gives me certain authorities. And then for higher levels of alert, the NAC has to grant that in a deliberate political move. So I have the authority to do everything I need to do right now, I believe, in the run-up to a period of conflict, to include deploying forces to deter the conflict, and then to be in position and be ready if the alliance should invoke Article 5. Yeah, I do think we've made a huge amount of progress in the past couple of years on that.
Because it's so rare to have the opportunity to interview SAC here, I asked a few of my colleagues for a question, and so I've gotten one from them.
Can't they just raise their hands?
They dare not show up given the question. I'm just kidding.
Oh, no.
The NATO force model is replacing the NATO response force. And at Tier 3, the new force structure is expected to field 500,000 troops in 30 to 100 days. Such a large-scale deployment at high readiness will require a thorough inspection mechanism. Do you have any such measures in mind, like SNAP exercises?
Yeah, we sure do. We've already got a readiness program inside the alliance. The question is how vigorously is it exercised, and is there any compliance mechanism inside it? Compliance in the alliance is always, up to nations. It's a political act, how high a level of readiness they want to maintain. But I do have the authority and the systems necessary to go inspect readiness. We're changing some of the things we look at, right? So as we look in Ukraine, we've put in an increased emphasis on stockpiles and munitions and supplies on hand and readily available. We've extended some of the things we look at to the logistical systems necessary to deploy and to resupply to our troops. Instead of just looking at the sharp side of the sword, we're looking at the whole sword now. And we've developed teams that will become active very soon that will go out and check readiness based on my authorities to inspect the readiness of the forces under my command or that are to be under my command in a time of crisis. Yeah.
We have a minute and a half left, so I'll ask you one final question. You mentioned the battle groups earlier. The president last night at the Mellon Auditorium discussed the 4 that were in existence prior to the full-scale invasion, the 4 new ones that have been put in place in the southern eastern flank of the alliance. We've seen what can happen under even short-term occupation by Russian forces in places like Bucha and Irpin. How confident are you that the forward land forces concept can guard against such a contingency in, say, the Baltic states?
Well, the forward land forces concept is not the totality of our plans to defend, right? It's the beginning of it. It's the stuff that's in place. And it's only one domain. Those are just land forces. We have air forces, we have other forces, right? It's just the beginning. All of that gets reinforced at time of crisis, and in the case of a conflict, all of that would become reinforced. I'm very confident that it can defend forward. The plans are specifically designed, and the timetables are specifically designed to defend every inch of the alliance's territory. And I think when we look at what happened in Ukraine, in places like Bucha, in Irpin, in places like that, Izium, I have a moral authority, a moral responsibility to defend every inch of our territory and all the citizens on it.
General Cavoli, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Peter. It's great.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, General Cavoli. Thank you, Peter, for really another fascinating conversation focused on the military aspect of readiness, of how we are learning from our Ukrainian brothers and sisters fighting brutal war with Russia, but also for emphasizing the need to defend every single inch of NATO territory. And believe me, coming from the eastern flank, this is very real for us and very important. Now, let me welcome Frederick Kemp, CEO and President of the Atlantic Council, for a conversation with the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Frederick, the stage is yours.
What a great lineup to start the day. The Secretary of State, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Secretary of Defense. It's really an honor to be here. And Thanks to everyone in the room. Good morning to you all, and good afternoon to everyone joining from Europe, and hello to everyone joining from all over the world virtually. Since its founding in 1949, since NATO's founding, the United States has played a pivotal role in safeguarding transatlantic security, and the Secretary of Defense has always been at the center of that. As one of NATO's founding members, the U.S. has proven to be a critical part of the alliance's collective defense and its adaptability to deter evolving threats. And they have been evolving. America has always stood ready to defend and protect the Euro-Atlantic area and beyond, continuing its commitments to the principles of the Washington Treaty. U.S. leadership was pivotal, particularly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, mobilizing tremendous support, and you've heard more about that today, new Air Force batteries, F-16s, to bolster collective defenses on NATO's eastern flank, fortifying the commitment to NATO allies, and extending that kind of critical assistance to Ukraine. So it's my privilege to introduce a leader who embodies this commitment to transatlantic and indeed global security, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. A graduate of West Point in 1975, Secretary Austin's career in the U.S. Army spanned more than 40 years. Throughout his years of service, he has led the command at the corps, division, battalion, and brigade levels in the U.S. Armed Forces. Secretary Austin was awarded the Silver Star for his leadership of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Before he concluded his uniformed service, Secretary Austin was the commander of the U.S. Central Command from 2013 to 2016, one of our most challenging positions, where he was responsible for all the military operations in the Middle East and Afghanistan. Under his leadership, the U.S. Department of Defense has adapted national defense strategies to address the greatest global challenges of our time. And it's reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to allies and its role as a champion of the rules-based order. In particular, and this is really important, Secretary Austin's late leadership in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group has proven invaluable in uniting over 50 nations to provide critical military support and security assistance to Ukraine. We saw Vladimir Putin's message to the NATO summit on Monday this week with a barrage of more than 40 missiles on Ukraine, including hitting a children's hospital. We've seen an answer in more air defenses. We've seen an answer in the F-16s. We've seen an answer in everything else that Secretary Austin and all the allies are doing. As President Biden has said, the world is at an inflection point with wars in the Middle East, Europe, rising challenge posed to China, biggest defense buildup, peacetime defense buildup in history from China. The Secretary of Defense is facing more simultaneous challenges than perhaps any predecessor. And we're lucky to have a man of his pedigree and capability at this historic moment. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage the 28th U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin.
Well, good morning. It's really good to be here with all of you. And Fred, thanks for that kind introduction. And for all that you've done for the Atlantic Council and for bringing us together on a pretty big week. It's a huge honor for the United States and President Biden to host this historic summit in Washington, just down the road from the site where the original 12 NATO allies signed the North Atlantic Treaty 75 years ago. And together, we're marking one of the great success stories that the world has ever known. On April 4th, 1949, those 12 democracies came together in the wake of 2 world wars and at the dawn of a new Cold War. And they all remembered, as President Truman put it, the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. And so they vowed to stand together for their collective defense and to safeguard freedom and democracy across Europe and North America. They made a solemn commitment, declaring that an armed attack against one ally would be considered an attack against them all. Now, that commitment was enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. It was the foundation of NATO, and it still is. And on that bedrock, we have built the strongest and most successful defensive alliance in human history. Throughout the Cold War, NATO deterred Soviet aggression against Western Europe and prevented a third World War. In the 1990s, NATO used air power to stop ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. And the day after September 11th, 2001, when al-Qaeda terrorists attacked our country, including slamming a plane into the Pentagon, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in its history. So NATO has always stood by us, and we're going to stand by NATO. Without NATO, the past 75 years would have been far different and far more dangerous. You know, I'm proud of the ways that NATO continues to strengthen our shared security. I'm proud of the way that NATO and America's other alliances and partnerships have grown and strengthened under the leadership of President Biden. And I'm especially proud of the way that our allies and partners, including our NATO allies, have met the challenge of Putin's increasingly aggressive Russia. In 2014, Putin made an illegal land grab against Ukraine's Crimea region in eastern Ukraine. And since then, NATO has undertaken the largest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation, with more forces, more capabilities, and more investment. Since 2014, our fellow allies have increased their defense spending by an average of 72%, accounting for inflation. In February 2022, the world again saw what President Truman called the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression, as the Kremlin's forces invaded the free and sovereign state of Ukraine. As this administration has made very clear, we will not be dragged into Putin's reckless war of choice. But we will stand by Ukraine as it fights for its sovereignty and security. We will defend every inch of NATO, and we will continue to strengthen NATO's collective defense and deterrence. In the wake of Putin's imperial invasion of Ukraine, we've bolstered NATO's forward defense posture with more troops at high readiness, larger exercises, sharper vigilance, and multinational battle groups in 8 countries. NATO is now larger than ever. And our new allies in Finland and Sweden have brought the alliance's membership to 32. And make no mistake, Putin's war is not the result of NATO enlargement. Putin's war is the cause of NATO enlargement. Over the past 3.5 years, we've also seen an historic increase in annual defense spending across the alliance by almost $80 billion. All NATO allies have agreed to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. In 2014, only 3 allies hit that target. In 2021, only 6 allies did so. But this year, a record 23 NATO allies are meeting the 2% defense spending target. Now, our NATO allies are not just spending more on their own defense, they're also spending more on America's defense industrial base. That means platforms and munitions built in America. And that's helping to revitalize production lines across our country and to create good jobs for American workers. Now, all of that progress is a testament to U.S. leadership and allied solidarity. But it's also a testament to the leadership of our outgoing Secretary General, my good friend Jens Stoltenberg. Throughout a decade of challenge, Jens has guided the alliance with skill and steel. And we are all deeply, deeply grateful. Now, we're going to keep building on our progress, and we've got an ambitious agenda this week. First, we'll continue to implement NATO's new family of plans, the most robust since the Cold War. And that will significantly improve our ability to deter and defend against any new threat. Second, we'll work to endorse a pledge to expand industrial capacity across the alliance. And this will help us scale up military production and send an important long-term signal to industry. Third, we'll deepen cooperation in support of Ukraine's self-defense. We'll launch a new military effort to help coordinate some aspects of security assistance and training for Ukraine. And we're poised to agree on a new financial pledge to Ukraine. As another sign of our deep commitment to Ukraine's self-defense, a coalition of countries has been working tirelessly to provide F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. And today, President Biden, alongside the Dutch and Danish prime ministers, is proud to announce the transfer of F-16s is officially underway, and Ukraine will be flying F-16s this summer. And finally, we'll continue to deepen ties with our global partners, especially in the Indo-Pacific. I know that we're all troubled by China's support for Putin's war against Ukraine. But that just reminds us of the profound links between Euro-Atlantic security and Indo-Pacific security. And it sends a message to the world that we are united in our values. So we have a lot to tackle together. But we're also here to mark this moment. We're here to strengthen an alliance that has kept millions of people safe for 75 years. And we're here to reaffirm the ironclad commitment that those 12 leaders made on April 4th, 1949. An armed attack against one ally is an attack against us all. You know, as you heard Fred say, I had a brief 41-year career in uniform. I started working with NATO back in 1975 when I was Lieutenant Austin. And I've never seen NATO stronger or more united than it is today. And we are determined to keep it that way. You know, I learned a lesson early on in my Army career, and that lesson is that as a soldier, the last thing that you want to do is to fight alone. So here's the blunt military reality. America is stronger with our allies. America is safer with our allies. And America is more secure with our allies. And any attempt to undermine NATO only undermines American security. So we are here this week to strengthen NATO and to strengthen American and allied security for the next 75 years. As President Biden has said, our foes and rivals have tried to shatter our unity, but our democracies have stood unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the legacy that we celebrate. That is the vow that we uphold, and that is the work that we will continue. Thank you very much.
Secretary Austin, thank you so much for the speech, for your thoughts, for your leadership as well, for really underpinning and emphasizing the message that the last thing that a soldier would want to do is fight alone. With that, for our guests online, please tune in for conversations with Doug Lute, U.S. Ambassador to NATO, and Rachel Rizzo. And for all of us here, there is a coffee break. Please be back at 10:35 and enjoy the conversations. Thanks.
of the alliance. I mean, I don't imagine any of them could have thought of 12 becoming 32. I think that they'd marvel at that. I think with the Washington Treaty being signed in Washington, right, that they'd be shocked that the only time Article 5 has been invoked in these 75 years had nothing to do with an attack in Western Europe, had nothing to do with America responding to that attack and reinforcing our European allies, had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. But in fact, on the day, September 11th, right, it was actually the inverse of all that. It was Europe coming to the assistance of America, to include, in part, because of an attack here in Washington. So they'd be surprised about Article 5. I'd also remark, though, these photos make clear that the 12 men who signed the Washington Treaty, I think would be surprised today at the role of women in leadership positions in NATO at multiple levels. So head of state and government, ministers, both foreign and defense ministers, the NATO staff, ambassadors, and so forth. I would add there that today, perhaps we should be surprised that there aren't more women in prominent roles in NATO. So I think there's a lot to be surprised at. One thing that they would not be surprised at.
Yeah, that's my next question.
I'll preempt your next question. They would not be surprised that NATO today is rallying in the face of Russian aggression.
Yeah.
That, of course, was the original forming cause of NATO. And today, I think, the founders would see a familiar Russia in terms of imperialist designs and aggression on its neighbors.
They probably wouldn't be surprised. They probably would also be surprised that we're trying to get Germany to spend more on defense and do more and be more forward-leaning as well.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Maybe even the Germans are a little surprised at that.
Yeah. There's a lot of surprise that has happened to us since 1949. You know, finally, one of the main headlines at this alliance, or at this specific summit, is what the alliance is delivering for Ukraine. There's a lot of talk about a bridge to membership that's well lit, that is short. But there's also been criticism that the weapons that we've been giving them have so many caveats on them that we're having Ukraine fight with one hand tied behind its back. What are your thoughts on the deliverables for Ukraine at this summit?
Well, I think that the military deliverables and the political deliverables, these two parallel tracks or lines of effort for Ukraine, are predictable and quite candidly, quite modest.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen even more progress on military assistance and on fulfilling the commitment that Ukraine politically will eventually become a member. The bridge metaphor works in part, but I'm not sure it's completely satisfactory. Look, I think everyone here at the summit this week was stunned by just the blatant aggression of the most recent Russian attack on Kyiv and other cities, to include the tragic attack on the Children's Hospital, right? It's important for us to remember two things. First of all, that attack originated from inside Russia. And the base from which that attack was launched is essentially in sanctuary because it is beyond the ability of Ukrainian indigenous capacity to strike it. And we have placed limits on the geographic range of the systems we've provided Ukraine. I know of no effective air defense program which focuses solely on defense of the target site by way of air defense systems and so forth, and neglects the attack of the launch sites.
Yeah.
Air defense is a two-way street, offense and defense. So in particular, you use the words caveat. I think that the restrictions, the caveats that we've placed and others have placed on some of our systems are not justifiable in legal terms. These are legitimate military targets, and they don't make sense in terms of military science.
Thank you for that clear answer and for your support of NATO and your support of Ukraine as well, and for this interview, Ambassador Lute. And to our audience watching online, tune in for another 2 days of programming here at the NATO Public Forum in Washington. Thank you so much.
Before we resume our live conversations, we will be viewing a short video. Over the next few days, you will be viewing several videos created by the organizing partners of the forum, bringing in voices on the ground from across the Alliance on a variety of issues. Please join me now in viewing the first such video from the U.S. heartland.
I view NATO as a global institution that is a vehicle for deterrence and collective defense. It is a defender of the free world and is a defender of our shared democratic principles.
NATO as an organization means personally to me as a security cooperation between its member countries provides an environment where I'm able to feel safe and secure.
NATO means hope to me. Hope that through strength of unity, we will no longer have world wars and have to send our young people to fight in them. Hopeful that a rogue leader or rogue nation will no longer be emboldened to attack a NATO country, and hopeful that into the future, NATO will create a more democratic and peaceful union in the world.
I feel admiration, I feel honor in that NATO was created after World War II. It means alliance among people, among nations who trust each other.
Apart from the obvious aim of peacekeeping and deterrence, it plays a crucial role in facilitating a coordinated effort to combat counterterrorism and cybersecurity. It is adapting to new threats, such as responding to disinformation campaigns and the weaponization of AI.
In its 75-year history, NATO has been successful in providing and guaranteeing the security of its countries from foreign intimidation.
I'm especially admiring the creation of NATO. Out of war came peace, and there were ideals of peace and harmony for the world in 1949, 75 years ago.
NATO was created for establishing and promoting economic and political security against Soviet or another future demagogue aggression. It's unfortunate that 75 years later, we are standing more or less in the same predicament with modern-day Russian military hostilities in Europe. What I hope for NATO, first and foremost, is for NATO to gain an ally in the next American presidency. And secondly, for nations in Europe to rise to the occasion and to meet the continued Russian aggression with the severity and seriousness it demands in order to protect Europe. Finally, a unified show of support in the future will demonstrate to other authoritarian leaders that NATO will not allow malicious leadership to trample on the will of the free world.
What I wish for in NATO's future is to act as a bulwark of democracy in these trying times of uncertainty, economically and politically.
As the future comes forward, we want that trust to be continued, and if it is at all destroyed a little bit, we want it to come back. So I say to the NATO nations, thank you, and keep peace for us in the world.
What a great way to bring in voices from across the United States heartland. For our next conversation, please join me in welcoming once again Frederick Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, to the stage for a conversation with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Join me in welcoming Frederick to the stage, please.
Good morning. It still is morning. It's great to see you all here in person. It's wonderful to have so many people here online from all over the world, and of course, across all of our allies in Europe as well. And so it's my honor to introduce someone I've known a long time now, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And I'm going to moderate a conversation with you in a moment, something you've called a pivotal moment for our alliance. I was going to start by saluting you on something I didn't know about, which is your great arm, because you threw out the first pitch of the Nationals game. And it was an amazing, yeah. I was there in the heat, sweating while I was watching you, but it was an amazing salute to NATO. But having been at Mellon Auditorium yesterday evening, one of the most moving events I've been at, I'll instead quote President Biden, what he said to you as he gave you the Presidential Medal of Freedom, to a standing ovation, a really remarkable moment. He called you a man of integrity and intellectual rigor, a calm temperament in moments of crisis, a consummate diplomat. And I think the consummate diplomat, a person who can engage with leaders across all spectrums and across all nationalities. And I just want to salute you on behalf of everyone in the audience for more than a decade of the most extraordinary leadership. So let's start with that. Thank you. So we at the Atlantic Council gave you our highest honor, the Atlantic Council Distinguished Leadership Award in 2017, and I consider that visionary. We knew you'd already accomplished a lot in your life, and I won't go through it all. You know, Prime Minister of Norway, all the things you've done for NATO and at NATO in terms of strengthening its defense, strengthening the defense spending, and I think it would take too long to go on that, and you're a humble man, and I don't think you would even want that. So I'm going to go right into the questions. You laid out 3 goals for this summit: increasing support for Ukraine for the long haul, reinforcing collective defense, and deepening global partnerships. I'm sure they're all important, but for this week, what do you consider most crucial?
I will answer that in a moment, but let me first say that it's great to be here, to be at the public forum, and many thanks to you, Fred, and also many thanks to all those who have organized and are making this event possible, because this is an important part of the summit, the public outreach, which this public forum is a very important part of. Then, thank you for your kind words. It has actually been a great privilege serving as Secretary General of NATO for 10 years. And I see around in the audience here, there are many people who have helped me, supported me. So many thanks to all of you for your advice, your help, and support throughout these years. Then, on throwing the first pitch, that is the most difficult task I ever committed as Secretary General of NATO. Not least because I've never been at a baseball match ever before. The first time I touched the baseball, actually, when I started to exercise for this, I thought it was a tennis ball, but it's not the case. So it was a very steep learning curve, and I think my future is not in baseball. I think my future is in something else.
I was going to say in the introduction that it showed that NATO always sets lofty targets.
Yeah. And we have to adapt to the challenges. Then, of course, this summit, it's of course a summit we're going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the strongest, most successful alliance in history. But the only way to truly celebrate that achievement, the 75th anniversary, is, of course, to demonstrate that NATO is adapting, that we are changing when the world is changing, because we are the most successful alliance in history, because we have changed when the world is changing. And now we live in a more dangerous, more challenging security environment, and therefore NATO is changing again. And therefore we will make important decisions at this summit for the future, not only celebrate the past. And there are three main issues. Is deterrence and defense, is our partnership with our Asia-Pacific partners. But of course, the most urgent, the most critical task at this summit will be everything we will do and decide on Ukraine. Because this is really the time where we are tested. If we want to stand up for democracy and freedom, it's now, and the place is Ukraine. I expect that the NATO leaders will agree a substantial package for Ukraine. There are fundamentally 5 elements in that package. One is that we will establish a NATO command for Ukraine to facilitate and ensure training and delivery of security assistance to Ukraine. It will be 700 personnel. It will take over much of what the US have done so far in leading the coordination of security assistance and training. It will be a command in Wiesbaden in Germany, but also with logistical nodes or hubs in the eastern part of the alliance, to ensure that we have a more institutionalized framework for our support to Ukraine. Then it will be a long-term pledge to support Ukraine, not least to send the message to President Putin that he cannot wait us out. Because the paradox is that the stronger and the more we are committed for a long term to support Ukraine, the sooner this war can end. So that's the thing we have to do. Then we will have, and we have already seen some new announcements of military immediate support with the air defense systems, with F-16s and other things that allies have and will announce. We have the bilateral, that's the third, also the announcement of more military aid. Then we have the bilateral security agreements, 20 agreed between NATO allies and Ukraine. And then the 5th element of the package for Ukraine will be more interoperability. We will have a new joint training and evaluation center in Bydgoszcz in Poland. We will have the comprehensive assistance package to help Ukraine implement reforms on the defense and security institutions to ensure that the armed forces are more and more interoperable with NATO. And together, the NATO command, the pledge, the bilateral security agreements, the announcement of new military support and interoperability, these 5 elements combined constitute a bridge to NATO membership for Ukraine. And later on today, we will see the language which we will agree in the NATO declaration on how to ensure that Ukraine is moving closer to NATO membership. So these are the 5 important deliverables on Ukraine that I expect allies will agree later on today.
Not to press you on what's actually going to be in the document, because of course you can't reveal that, but we saw at the Vilnius summit, hearing it again in Washington, that allies closer to Russia or more eager to provide NATO membership sooner for Ukraine. And no doubt the bridge and all the elements of the bridge are pretty impressive, including the new command. But are Ukraine's NATO membership prospects sufficient? We did our own wargaming with our Estonian partners in the Estonian government. And we found almost under any scenario Ukraine was safer in NATO, that Russia would respond in a way that would be less provocative with it in than outside. What's your thinking on that, and have we gone far enough with Ukraine?
So first of all, the language you will see later on today in the NATO declaration, or the declaration from the heads of state and government, of course that language is important because language matters. It sets an agenda, it points a direction. But of course, action speaks louder than words. So in addition to the language in the declaration on membership, which again is important, I think that what we actually do together with Ukraine is as important. And therefore, the fact that we now have a NATO framework, we'll have a NATO framework around the support. The fact that we have a long-term NATO commitment when we agreed the pledge. And also the fact that we actually are delivering more weapon systems to Ukraine. All of that is helping Ukraine to become closer to NATO membership. Because when we now deliver F-16s, we don't only deliver F-16s, we deliver the training, the doctrines, the operational concepts that will actually move Ukraine closer to being fully interoperable with NATO on more and more areas. So again, language is important, but the elements in the package I mentioned, they are actually changing the reality, enabling Ukraine to come closer to membership. So we can then, when the time is right, when we have consensus and the political conditions are in place, so when an invitation then is issued, they can become members straight away. I cannot give you a date because, as you know, there has to be consensus in this alliance on membership. But what I can say is that when the fighting stops in Ukraine, we need to ensure that that's really the end. Because what we have seen is a pattern of aggression. First, Russia annexed Crimea. We said that was unacceptable. After some few months, they went into Eastern Donbass. We said that that was unacceptable. Then we had the Minsk I agreement with the delimitation of the ceasefire line. That was violated, and Russia pushed the front lines further east, further west in Donbass in 2014. We had Minsk II, and the Russians waited then for 7 years, and they had a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, because Minsk II was in 2015. So we have seen a pattern where they've taken slices of Ukraine. So if there is now a new ceasefire, a new agreement, then we need to be 100% certain that it stops there, regardless of where that line is. And therefore, I strongly believe that when the fighting stops, we need to ensure that Ukraine has the capabilities to deter future aggression from Russia, and they need security guarantees. And of course, the best and strongest security guarantee will be Article 5. So therefore, I believe that a way to ensure that it stops is actually NATO membership.
Thank you for that very clear answer. One more brief question on Ukraine, and then we'll move on to Indo-Pacific. In a press conference you had with President Macron a couple of weeks ago, you noted recent gaps and delays and how they've led in funding and weapons and led to battlefield consequences. You said, quote, "We must give Ukraine the predictability and accountability it needs to defend itself." So 2 questions. Is everything you've talked about today that's going to be agreed enough? And secondarily, not just with uncertainties in US politics, which exist, but also uncertainties in European politics, do you worry at all about the sustainability of that support over time?
So first of all, you are right that I have referred to, I also did that in Kiev in a meeting with President Zelensky earlier this spring, to the fact that the early spring, allies didn't deliver on their promises to Ukraine. We saw the delays in the US, months agreeing a supplemental, but we also saw European allies not being able to deliver the ammunition and the support they have announced. So of course these gaps and these delays in military support to Ukraine, they created a very difficult situation for the Ukrainians on the battlefield. The good news in that difficult situation is that despite of the delays in our support to Ukraine, the Ukrainians have actually been able to hold the line, more or less. So the Russians have not been able to utilize these delays in really making any big advantage on the battlefield. Now we are providing more support, and I'm confident that allies will now actually deliver, and we see that, for instance, ammunition moving into Ukraine has been a significant increase over the last weeks. The purpose of a stronger NATO role in providing training and security assistance, the purpose of the command and the purpose of the pledge is, of course, to minimize the risks for future delays and gaps. But of course, you don't have guarantees, because at the end of the day, it has to be support in all the individual allied capitals and parliaments to providing this support. And at the end of the day, you have to go to the Congress, to the parliaments across Europe and Canada to get support. But I believe that when obligation, a NATO framework, it is the threshold for not delivering will be higher than when it's based on more voluntary ad hoc national announcements. So the purpose of creating a stronger NATO framework is to make the support more robust and more predictable. It's also another part of this NATO framework for the support on the pledge and the command, and that is that it will visualize and ensure burden sharing. Because my impression is that, especially in the United States, there's this perception that the United States is almost alone in delivering support to Ukraine. That's not the case. When you look at military support, roughly 50% of the military support is provided by European allies and Canada. 99% of the support, military support to Ukraine, comes from NATO allies, but 50% of that comes from European allies and Canada. If you add economic, macroeconomic support, humanitarian support, the European allies are providing much more than the United States. So the point with the pledge is to ensure that we have some kind of agreed formulas for burden sharing, that we have more transparency, and also that we have more accountability. Because then we can use NATO to count, to measure, and to ensure that allies deliver. It's not the same, but it's a bit like the 2% pledge. Because the importance with the pledge we made in Wales in 2014 was actually to give NATO a role to enforce and to ensure that allies delivered, and also that we agreed how to count and what to count. And that's also what we now do with the pledge, to agree how to count and what to count, and to give NATO a role to having also accountability. So again, there are no guarantees, but by giving NATO that role, I think the likelihood for allies delivering what they have promised will increase, and the likelihood of new gaps will decrease, and that's the purpose of giving NATO a stronger role.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Let's go to China. This 2022 strategic concept, NATO strategic concept, recognized China as a challenge for the first time and the broader rules-based system. You've noted that Russia imports 90% of its microelectronics from China, which goes into military. Secretary Blinken today talked about 70% of machine tools that help the military coming from China. You've also said that if this doesn't change, as they're fueling the greatest armed conflict in Europe since World War II, allies need to impose a cost. Is it time for that? And what cost can NATO and NATO countries actually impose?
So first of all, I think it's important that we recognize the reality, and that's the first step towards any action. And that is that not only are Iran and North Korea important when it comes to enabling Russia's war aggression against Ukraine, but China is the main enabler. Because, as you refer to, they are delivering the tools, the dual-use equipment, the microelectronics, everything Russia needs to build the missiles, the bombs, the aircraft, and all the other systems they use against Ukraine. Well, I have said that. It remains to be seen how far allies are willing to go. But I strongly believe that if China continues, they cannot have it both ways. They cannot believe that they can have a kind of normal relationship with NATO allies in North America and Europe, and then continue to fuel the war in Europe that constitutes the biggest security challenge for our security since the Second World War. So this is a challenge for the alliance. Let's see how far we're willing to go as allies.
So we're getting close to the end of time, so just two other brief questions. First, Indo-Pacific 4, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand are here. Third time taking part in NATO summit, but it's going to be the first NATO joint document with this group. Can you give us some insight into what might be in it and any concrete outcomes?
Yeah, so first I would just say that the fact that we now are engaging so closely with our Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea, that reflects a change in NATO, because that was not the case a few years ago. And as many of you may know, the first time we mentioned China in an agreed negotiated document in NATO is at the NATO summit in London in 2019. And in the previous NATO strategic concept, China was not mentioned with a single word. Now China has a prominent place in the strategic concept we agreed in Madrid. And the fact that we're now engaging so closely with our Indo-Pacific partners reflect, of course, the fact that we have to take China seriously when it comes to the challenges it poses for our security. And the war in Ukraine is perhaps the most obvious example, or as the Japanese Prime Minister has said several times, what happens in Ukraine today can happen in Asia tomorrow. We are now working with our Asia-Pacific partners how we can do more together with them. We will agree some flagship projects. That's about technology. It's about support Ukraine. But we are also working, for instance, as part of our defense industrial pledge, how we can ramp up defense industrial production and cooperation with these countries. They are big, some of them, on defense industry. We can work closely with them to ramp up our combined defense industrial capacity. We can exchange more information. And I also welcome the fact that more and more allies are now also conducting joint exercises. Recently, there was a big air exercise. Allies are also more and more actively also looking into how they can also have more naval exercises with our Asia-Pacific partners. Because NATO will remain an alliance of North America and Europe. We will not be a global NATO. NATO will be North America and Europe. But this region, the North Atlantic region, we face global threats. And the reality is that's nothing new.